I'm soaring, friends. Vitaly Portnikov is with you. Say our today's broadcast, all of our today's oyster, will be illuminated by the posh legacy of the criticized phone calls between the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. I will tell buckets that with the point of Zoru practical, we are spared greedy results. And at the moment, I would like to respectfully talk about the practical significance of analyzing Tilke in one single phrase in the hall. One single phrase, as the President of the United States Donald Trump said with Putin in the phrase, "I did not leave in a date," saying that I diluted with Putin, and about the completed guilt of the Russian-Ukrainian, and Trump continuing to debate that Putin loves completed guilt. Vin for Propanovev Putin perpi into the fire. And Putin is a kind of proposition. I would like to tell you that I was just the idea of burning in the fire was the head idea of Donald Trump about ending the Russian-Ukrainian guilt. His election campaign. We'll mark it up, yak, it's all been said. Zafu Putin, Zapana them for guilt. I will cut off Ukraine and help Ukraine and Russia and help Ukraine. I was not accepted by Putin about the position in the fire. This is essentially the very proposition that was important for Trump to bend there about millions of people. Thousands of people were bent down on the whiskey line so that there would be no missile and drone strikes. And President Putin, who clearly said, did not go numb at the fire on him, that Tilke is a comprehensive world, that we are a one-time wife of the kind of Russian officials and politicians. This means that Pershi has his own scope with Putin at the legal detailed Razmo. Trump did not get Putin what he really wanted. And then you start the political process from the unreasonable ending. Trump, having already formed his negotiating group to end the guilt of Russia and Ukraine in this group, as we have already got up with you to talk and the process. Not to see the end of the Russian-Ukrainian guilt of General Keith. I am now Trump's obvious ambush and for pumped-up guilt and exiled Ukraine about Russia. Russia Tilke has overgrown, forming its own group. Putin will not rush anywhere at once, literally sprat valiant before our sweep, declared all the information in the Wall Street Journal. That Putin would be ready to go into the fire when hiring Tilke in exchange for a full supply of American Ukraine. And about what I seem to post. Putin for the blame, Tilke for two minds. The Russian economy today, looking at the style not for a long time, still simply not allowing Putin, I will continue this war. And the gates are not mines for the reset, and the Russian reset forces for a further fatal blow to Ukraine. And for the cob of guilt in Europe. There's also Putin's Shiro, that he has of no afore in the cadence of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a distance of guilt in Europe, not a brother's fate in it. Vrakov, today's camp of the discarded sons of the Russian Federation from Putin, is not attacked by European Ukraine. He needs an hour, and the idea is absolutely clear. On Europe, and it is possible to paste in the period of 2025-2029 hands. So that Nats jumped out into the military forces. Why, in principle, are those of our Gliadachi yaks on us overgrown in Europe? Write them in the comments in European places at this time. What else do you think? Chitko razruhuvity terms. Kola they need poku disturbing aliski, and think and bomb, vrak the whole formula. The moment of the arrival of military days in Ukraine, and the private dumping of the Russian army. So, in principle, I still rank wine in Ukraine in the 2025-2026 lessons on Uchek. And wine on the estimate, 2028 on the cob, 2029 rock. That's just it, of course. I'm in now, but you sell to me, you know you're the one who's been dumped. I namaga all Ukrainians. Find here in Ukraine 2020 other rock. But I think that those who leaned up to my chances are still those who leaned up to the official and prot. It is very important that Ukraine is not weakened. Putin did not accept the blame. I still had alternatives really in Ukraine, Mat's guarantees and Mat's reset. Mat's arsenal for the teeth of Russian aggression. The yak on the sprat of the Russian Federation's Hromadians will be mobilizations, and rules are not on the Ukrainian front. Because there is so much mobilization potential I'm handing over. I am not the Russian population of Putin's Maya. Then there were no contracts, and the Russian-Ukrainian guilt will arise. Not, of course, beer Korean whiskey. So Russia has a lot of mobilization potential after all, but without dumping the extremely difficult gates for mobilization potential. The moment? Putin will extort a pro-Russian federation from the US to Ukraine and from sanctions. The economical camp of Russia and the pursuit of destabilization of Ukraine. Discounts are ripe. It's not easy to get it at a time. Carnage shades. This is the destabilization of Ukraine and is in full swing and looks overgrown. The Rada of National Defense on sanctions against Petro Poroshenko is alive in the package with Kolomoisky-Medvedchuk. Obviously, the adoration of the Lord is becoming an authoritarian type of regime, a regime in the choice from praise to the term needed by the president. For the Belarusian scenario of the eternal presidency. So it's not in the fantasies of the president's office. And supposedly, of course, it's not up to authoritarianism in Ukrainian, but to destabilization. And destabilization is the death of statehood. What, and we are here a kind of the most telephone scope of Putin and Trump. So I told you about practical inheritances. Into a single practical inheritance, of course, a single one. Trump having put him in the fire, Putin having sent him. PPR ideological inheritances. Ideological heirs to the rich Gershik. The president of the largest democratic power, with a participating retinue, the leader of a democratic retinue. And the leader of Ukraine has explained the aggression in Europe. I am selling 3 Rocky, driving people in, occupying other people's territories, and not the word will punish him, not the word process. In not yak, not characterizing now not with Putin about the spilny friend of the light vein, ignoring the fact that at the moment of her, the Russian Federation in general was not again eye of the powers, but was often the powers of the Radinsky Union. Yaks, we are with you, our births were taken out on the fronts in another light fault. Us, Trump, and Inchi. Although in the received states, they are migrants and Trump and Mask. But at the same time, their non-families live in the received states. The fact that so few Americans have looked at the fronts of guilt for the Russian term, and friend and light for our and European understanding. The process. So you just and extremely for Rahunkum, removing from the received in the state in the role of the leader of the Democratic retinue. Trump is still the leader of the Democratic entourage, with getting the states, not Bewley. There and the leader of the retinue is overestimated. We have our own economy, our own military potential of the nuclear arsenal, the nuclear potential of the Russian Federation people. The leader of the retinue is so, the leader of the Democratic retinue. Not like that. And we are still bashing Trump, not literally for Sprat, in our oyster protrusions, in the Chergovaya claim. Also, in order for Russia to turn into groups, the whole group became a group of weights from an absolutely obvious speech. Pragnuv and the presidency. Yeah, we'll mark it up with you. And Namaga, all of Putin's requests for an oyster group is not a one-time guest. And there were tilks to the fact that the leaders of the group performed against them. And why was Putin turned off from the group? Are you marking? It's like we're hanging. The annexation of Crimea and guilt in the Donbas. Leaders of the powers of the president's entourage with Barack Obama received in the state. You unanimously decided that Ukraine would break the fundamental principles of a democratic entourage into groups. In principle, in the status of the 2008 kind, Russia attacked Georgia. And she didn't stay. And in the 14th kind, Putin has already understood more cola, he finds a time with the leader and a democratic retinue. Neither will Trump herself. And then Putin is not a criminal malefactor. A warrant for ash of such a kind is an international criminal court. Another group of the 8th can be seen to appear on Putin, cannot go to meetings, to a meeting of the BRICS. And that's the focus. The focus is that Trump, absolutely not accepting the group, I am a group of leaders of a democratic retinue. Not accepting. And the soul is an important moment, and I want you to shit. You just perceive the group as a group of leaders of wired economies of the suite. This is logical torture. Why in the T group, and may of the head of the People's Republic of China Xi Jinping, the eco economy is several times, 10 times lower than the economy of the Russian Federation and the economy of the rich. In the T group on the May of the Prime Minister of India, on the fashion render, I was defending my Vlad before the speech. As seen in the early parliamentary elections in India, on Vidminu view of Putin. Well, you and I, of course, are still all that Trump says, something is visible in the which group. Resounding Myachnia, the idea of a simple reason, that the cries of the democratic powers of Nikola are not about Trump's position. And so we decided, you can take advantage of Tilka alone, by consensus of all the leaders of the group. But otherwise. An important moment. I'm basically demonstrating that yak, looking inserted by Trump before the Russian Federation. All praises, I will lead the Viskovo business jet along the windy forces from the received states, the infection of Vishov, to the windy just of the Russian Federation, and goes to Moscow. You respect the high-ranking officials of President Trump's administrations on board the Letic tag, maybe. His for the future round Mish America and Russia at the Munich conference. Now I am some president of the vice president with the J. Divans received in the state, and the American delegation to the Munich conference. You're an oyster. In principle, Maya will show that Ukraine will continue to be a brother and a part of this process. Even more with the received states are not ready to you rumors in food. Because all sorts of Trump on the cob and the second years were not diluted with Putin, I'm with a good friend. Orient was jealous. And at 1 hour he diluted the beer with the slaughtered. The prices just weren't imaginative for Ukraine. I respect that the figurative 4C received in the state, and with an ally and diluted with a friend. All the aggression of Donald Trump, after he managed to turn around, finished us off with a direct attack on the Allies' marks about Denmark, about Canada, about Mexico. With an ally, I'm tougher. I will not destroy Putin with anything. You can both come to Moscow on the Pax. And I can say that it may be a Russian idea. I will not throw it, but the chain process is as important as we are, of course, for Russia from the point of view of image. It is not easy to break through diplomatic isolation, which is in itself for Putin. To get from the fact that Donald Trump came to Moscow for the injury of 2025th year. And here I am right now visiting Trump in 3, the head of the People's Republic of China Xi Jinping, the president of the Russian Federation Vladimir Putin, gentleman from Oyster, the president with Donald Trump received in the state, Yak junior partner for Oyster, and to talk about the suite, about the sphere of Russia's entry into Europe, about the sphere of China's entry into Asia, about what will happen with the received state of America. Putin's fantasies. I absolutely do not think that Donald Trump is for such a role and for such a time. They will try and the option will be tested. And a drawn-out trial until the 9th grass of 2025 rock. To Trump to Moscow requests for the amount. And in our mind, of course, we will not take the blame. What is their non-head political idea? Joseph Biden is now at fault for traveling to Kiev, and Donald Trump is at fault for coming to Moscow. Of course, this is not their revenge. They are not through the chain of the president with the 2025th hand received in the state. At the time of the 9th injury, tell him I will strike at Kiev, at Lvovich, on the Dnieper Iskander, and I will take their trophies. And may be thrown before the descent to the Lenin mausoleum. That's what they're going to do to us. As we will discuss, we are the real interests of Putin's point of view about Nostupnogo rock. For Clay would be taken until the moment when Ukraine is politically led away to Ukraine with a political map of a retinue of serious peace and Donald Trump. In principle, the one who shows is not like a light leader from a democratic point of view, not like. And Trump can't allow it. An important point about the need to say. The fact that we have beaten the position of Europe, it is no longer his position. The fact that Trump will ignore Putin's Tilky. Losing out to European leaders so much. You want the European orders and peoples to take over. And without respecting the reason for the need for consultation, you take it away with Vladimir Putin. And the Europeans in the evening of reason, with the Minister of the Lawless Certificates of Ukraine. The ministers of the lawless certificates of the Ukrainians of Europe issued a document about the fact that there could still be a just world for them without their fate, without the fate of Ukraine, so that they extort Europe to be a participant in the workshop. And an important point. I'm in the European Union here, and about the position of Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The lime of the application and the Yuli with the days received in the state for the wires is an extraordinary mill. Tesh is richly easier to say such a reaction to what happens. So behind the roller recunkum, in principle, it can be clearly said that in the spilkin of the Russian and American leaders. Destruction to the fact that Trump is again such a valuable sensation of Chekhov. Breaking through the diplomatic blockade and isolation of Vladimir Putin. You are his master forever in isolation. Something that could have been different. In place of Joseph Biden, the president. Here it could be on the status, supposedly of course. And Tashka is not right on Maba. And the breakthroughs of diplomatic isolation are not yet known for discounts and a breakthrough on the Europeans. Putin's escort can be Trump's counterparty, and Trump can replace European values. And hone the ultra-right into post-fascist hands all over Europe. Discounts of the situation. And this is Europe Wymogami with seats at the table ready for the Europeans. The Prime Minister in Britain, Rick Starmer, said that in the case of Ukraine, Donato Posa is a fallow as a result. Yak put Donald Trump, it's already important to him. In Zagoli, the ideal way out of the situation would be for us to have Putin's isolation diplomatically changed. About Donald Trump's isolation ideologically. That Donald Trump is now an ally with such an and with such principles. His ally? Maybe Victor is there for Vlad in the middle. His ally. Maybe Javier and Vlada are there in Argentina. But throughout the European continent, he does not have such obvious allies. The fact that European leaders are in a compromise with Donald Trump. I admit, in principle, overgrown and stitch by stitch, the Tesh can become a serious idea. Another delegation arrived to Moscow, and they will dilute the representatives of the Russian political. Even before the minds of those persuasions, I will be signed firm about that comprehensive world about Putin. And the berries look like angles. At discounts, it really serves the interests of Ukraine. And Ukraine with such an agreement, and it is, in principle, a prelude to a new guilt of Russia from Ukraine. And it is already in his hands. There was an honest moment when it was necessary. Then I will also declare a wail about the fact that the territories will be fixed in the Crimea to please, but in Ukraine absolutely not. Both of them will need to know such a favor. What does this mean in practice? Even with the receipt of the states for Ukraine will be ready for Vidminu over the territory for discounts, Zagoli say. I respect the good year about Patenton in spending the territory. However, Ukraine is not both to blame. And who will be recognized? And for Russia, those years mean the future. Russia is just going to extort simple speeches from Ukraine. Conclusions of the Ukrainian visas, believe me, since then Russia has been voting its own. And they will say, and Trump, that they held a referendum there, that the government voted to travel to Russia. That Russian-speaking people live there in the hall. Trump Pivchuva. Another mind for Propa in the fire. Ukrainian troops have taken up their positions in Donetsk and Luhansk, Kherson, and beyond the Paris region. And the entire territory is demilitarizable and permissible. And the extremely Ukrainian parliament is out of the behavior of treason before the constitution and extort constitutional knowledge. That in Ukraine, Donetsk and Lugansk, Kherson and Paris regions, Crimea and Sevastopol, will learn an article about the priority of Euro-Atlantic integration. And believe me, they gave and extorted that we are types of the European Union. There is still a Tesh component in the European Union, in the military, and load Russia. I'm going to explain right now that in truth for Putin, and for his GOP company, I'm not the head. But such that their partners could not praise them, so that even before that hour, an apparently economical potential is traveling around Russia. Even in Russia, it is impossible to let them in. And you, of course, are not me, as you do not withdraw your visas from the purchased territories. Not at the expense. Their retinues can be knocked out if they do not pass the Chekist Vladimir Tilky. Absolutely obvious, of course. So in the dark plan, it's serious. I trust Putin. I believe that adoring the mayor, I would gladly turn Russia into a group with Trump and such a serious approach. I will accept a view from Ukraine, and my territory of Russia will become the largest of the Rada in the case of Poland. The leader of the Liberal Democrats at the British Parliament. I would say Zakop ideas and Trump in Europe and May. You in the audience do not think that we need to reformat the very concept of our Yaki Europeans. But we will be able to Trump and his electorate a story about rare with the land stage. It became clear early on that the chip did not bring a penny to Trump and his electorate at a time. That Trump had been driven to the huts on Europe and not to the huts on Russia. Maybe the Europeans, who understand Ukraine, are overgrown, they need a fort. And we will also understand that when hiring for erosions of American democracy, America needs to be bypassed. America will turn and you. Trumpism is organized simply from a demographic point of view. All these people are voting for Trump, it's like classic America. There they are getting old anyway, they have fewer children. There they simply will not have an electoral audience in this for dependent Rocky. These national tires are voting for Trump. According to the Verts, they will not disappoint for his cadence as much as Nicola was not disappointed in anything. So the president-elect from the states received over the bay looks not isolationists. And to America, and the cottage will not be like that, because I'm looking at it. It will be possible to get out of America with him, but we will not be able to go with you to chaos and God. The Americans will not be able to, and we can also really think that we, the Europeans, think about the concept. Think about what you will do next. I'm still Trump for no reason. And think and spend on discounts logical zakonchi in the fire. What will Trump Zagoli do you not know? To reveal more on the truth, Vladimir Putin is elected to finish. Mr. Vitaly, how much do you have beatings even before the effectiveness of our Lord and the guilt of the fact that the uprising in Ukraine? I'm on it. I'm asking you to subscribe to the channel. I will be to you in diachny, skin who will subscribe. Here in those boulders can become 800,000th on the channel. And I will also be glad to have the topic of the 800,000th Tesh in diachno. There is still a healthy glust in those situations. For the ages we are and Tesh prospects for, I do not know what we can do to spend from Ukraine through our Vlad. And now, there is still a pile of shit in Kiev, but in the Kremlin. We can open up Ukraine, and Tilka, that the Russian Federation will not be over a civilized retinue. Tilka, that she will continue to attack our territory. And we also litter that Russian state with the Ukrainian state, and kicked out the Ukrainians, the mission of his residence, and forgot to kick out thousands of people part of the operation. And it is absolutely obvious that in order for Vlad to be needed effectively, I am also our Vlad just before the election, who wants to pursue his political opponents as well. And leaves the mind in controlia information can truly give in on and territorial spending, and growth in Ukraineskomu. And that we, as the wine will live solo catastrophe. It's absolutely real to close your eyes. Trump diluted Besley with Putin, he seemed to be the process itself, and you decided everything a long time ago. I think no one has diluted it with anyone yet. I want you even the one we know. I was there yesterday, and I was not able to reach them, and will find them there for thousands of days. All these sensitive protimes of Putin and Trump were sensitively profited by Trump himself, for the Russians back in the fold. That is, such a smoke hovering. Trump Nikola did not find out with Putin. And think for yourself. I also talked to Putin about what was needed in the communique on the network for all the second years. There was no such thing. Because that's the focus. Trump, in his light, his reality, in such a mythological reality. And the entanglement of journalists, entanglements and the media, it is so fitting for him to respect his success. Overestimating everyone, there will be an appointment. Trump and Putin are unforgiven, and because you're barely a politician and can't help but be simpler than houses, of course. According to the category of historical income, and according to the categories of money. From all categories, and oh, I'm another one running with a geographical map, and shouting there was Russian land. And we talk obscenely rare with metal. And of course, that those people are aliens, it may be easier to say. And the apple tree has a gap. So it's unlikely. Out and hand it over to me. The coalition Risusi European partners on the right with Ukraine's GDP is below the state of California. From a financial point of view, it's like this. The problem of Europe is military pennies. But there are hundreds of military arsenals. In other words, the main problem is that we can close in time with the receipt of the staff of the military Europeans. And can deduct pennies for purchasing the discharges of American military companies. Americans sproy to fig. And the Europeans have pennies, but they don't have to get the fins. And the stats are a test for the realism of Johnny Rocky. The Europeans will also deduct groves they bought American dumping, and Trump, let's say, will not abandon him. Then the story with the Ukrainian one. And on the mind, Trump will also want access to the invited rare metals, then do with the Europeans. Even the Europeans will be pennies for military Ukraine in its metals as a result. And denazification is already necessary for Putin, and Russia will be on the testing ground for denazification. Denazification will look like in those territories in Russia. It is simply visible to the Russian the Russian Orthodox Church, for the defense of the fascist party's Russia, on the was of the National Democratic Force. It is not visible the activity of pro-Russian political forces. It's not all extortion, either. Pan Vitalyevich, you are on the thorns of Europe and the USA. The ultra-right will be preparing dates for an hour. The political ultra-right is already coming before Vlad. Extremely Bach. In Europe, believe me, the ultra-political sun. It's just that in Ukraine, there is no alliance of Serovnecht and Dalika in Ukraine. And it seemed that it was still possible to get to the Bundestag. I'm a shrew with ultra-left political forces, according to demos, and ended in Spain. Ultra-left political parties. Rook 5 Zerig from Italy stole the political ultra-left political forces. Populist. So here is the sec of the party at a time you hand over for non-ratings. As the success of the post-fascists, and their ratings will not be knocked down. Since not so long ago, all these far-right parties were obviously politically marginalized. And at the same time, they do not cease to be political marginals. In the big Hitler and Mussolini, and in the exiles, in the big Trotsky and Stalin. And torturing the most ideological Rook. Believe me, we will not live in an ultra-right light. And those who are living post-fascists, well, just physically end up alive. I will not be shot, and I will not be hanged. They will be richly in the ultra-left light. The ultra-left suite can be identified on the richly private non-ultra-right. Include with the received states of America. The president is Deputy Octavia Cortez. Yes. And hot. We all pobed him. Supposedly respects, and then can be explained in the same way Trump to Putin. Such Putin is bad at washing. I'm still so on check and holy wine. So, holy guilt on the check, I have already explained what. It can also be in Europe. Trump distant blame in Europe, then blow. Well, I will notify you, you will not show bad, not bad at the junction. Don't be a cheat, this is narcissism, and the ultra-right looks and benefits in the world with fools. Trump simply respecting authoritarian rulers, he himself would so richly not believe that in Putin. TPPR in principle, Trump in the voice. You still won't believe him, and I will still give you a fantastic outburst, I'm still Trump on the section of the retinue on 3. All who check and saint, and thrust a strategic nuclear dump, and bent tens of millions of people. I still 8 and on 3 insanely at the skin of the participants, in such a raspo, will be the focus taken bilch. Stalin and Hitler touched and retinue. And what did it produce? I am still an authoritarian wire, or they divide between themselves, and Donald Trump is the role of an authoritarian democratic leader. Then 2 will be bent over, deceived, and the third will be deceived by them, and both will be cooked. In the light of the dictator of authoritarian pro-populace, the mayor and friendship are mute. And I turned off adoration, deceived simple, brainwashed, low. So and so in it everything will be the same, do not doubt. Firm the same. The torture is coming. I'm a cover guide, not from the fact that the economical situation in Russia. Vitaly and Putin are helping the ways overgrown through Rick suddenly, and so. 1000 in Russian self-driving potential on a Ukrainian drone. The Russian climbed at once is in the collapse of naphtha, often on installation in den sprats. Snafts I cut down at a time in the Russian Federation cannot be delivered to ground cuttings, there are still just merchants. It's just not enough for that, and for talking about the fact that Russia can no longer straighten out the situation. In NABE 3 to 6 months in freezing, NAFTA, to conserve Russian Neftegazovogo complex. As you know, the transit of gas through the Ukrainian transport system, in and pressing the promo for all times, can be seen without forgetting anything forever in the coffin of Gazprom. And there are a lot of such buttocks. Ostensibly and in principle, they mirrored the economic potentials of the tsept on economical experts in the Russian market, and my task is to tell you about the facts. The problem is a fact. The fact that Putin was informed of all the problems of what is coming true is a fact. On discounts, it's serious for him, I can't tell you. To be honest, I can't. And we are on the offensive, not that Putin needs it at a time, it is still visible that they will not rush to Ukraine. And just Trump's cadence. So Slukajno suite is for Trump and democratic and authoritarianism. On the knowledge of discounts Burke in the activities of the president with the received in the state, you are your stay in the posad. As a rule, this does not happen. The administration knows from the cob with the fact that you happen to have secret information, analyses. Of course, I'm there, and Trump, looking just like this elephant of the clearing. With Ruinu, and on their own road. You kind of lead on the torture, you ask for discounts on discounts seriously. So under the yak looking real from the point of view of away from Trump and his administration. On discounts in the scene serious sums, so simply everything is possible. Pan Vitaly, it turned out that you are still the geopolitics of the opposite, and not about interests. Trump is not talking about geopolitics. Trump is about interests. Geopolitics, of course, but from the point of view of geopolitics, of course, with the received staff. It is absolutely indecent with its allies. On the screen, claims to Canada, to Mexico. It can be all the way. Here you are choking out of Russia all at once. On Russia, Trump is not bitter, not spreading power, and baking Hamas. And Canada, Mexico, Denmark are chauvinistic and aggressive and hysterical. Geopolitics is a priority. Here is a view for you to see the torture you are asking. What else did Trump have in mind, I Pascha for Putin? I don't think Trump is conceiving a Pascha for Putin. I think that a person who respects Putin in the date will lose and impose on him his supposedly check on him. And a serious disappointment. Putin is a serious opponent. And that the Ukrainians did not understand Nikola and respected him just like an idiot. So Putin can work engagements, tied up with his ideological fascination. That was the blitzkrieg of a fierce 2020 friend. To the fact that Putin does not give the readiness of the Ukrainian people to support, and not the camp of our army. And not our clay, of course, the Ukrainian, I would say, mentality. And of course another 7,300 people vote for, it means they respect that they capitulate to Putin. Respectful to Putin on Ukrainian minds. Those people. Himself and so. And Putin is not, of course. I don't think people can think like that. Here is the pose of his picture and retinue. So, and people respected it so much. And all of sociology has shown this. And sociology showed that people respected the cob of guilt, that Zaki's guilt on the cordons was 1,995. What are people talking about, perhaps? And so, of course, justice. And justice is not a political category. Of course, I will not be able to get rich from Putin, even the Ukrainian peoples and post-political categories, in terms of the fairness of the real. And the people pose as a real retinue, and he is just because Putin is in his illusions, Trump is in his Ukrainians. Those three saints can, because they can't, and yak is not often our impulse, but often our time. Just of course. From the torture of whose wart, to trust the analysis of the Dan intelligence. I will leak Russia's attack on the Ukraine of the European Union. I have already gone to the cob of our program. In Moscow, they respect Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union. But the military. With the receipt of the states from the participants, the Trump states distance conflicts and will not take part in it. In addition to NATO, the Trump NATO and Europe is not a priority. And Putin may have his hands free, but for the occupation of the Baltic Ukraine to strike at Poland. The occupation is frequent on the territory of Poland, for example. In order to expand the territory of the Kaliningrad region of Russia there, and it is possible to simply think for the Baltic Fleet. And I will say again, there is a Russian army in that Houston for a century today. Not like I'm going to attack the European Ukraine, I'm not going to sleep. I am still the fault in Ukraine of any tribute intelligence. Rich, informed people in Europe. And it is not publicly so rich an hour that Russia is already here with her outside the call, showing her army in the format of I am an army for pasta on Europe. So tell Xi Jinping, after the Congress of the Communist Party of China reformatted in the military rejoices as the P. So the generals came out, I am specialists, and with Taiwanese influx from Taiwan. You think you're a horseshoe knot. So, I understand that Russia will need an hour for such an attack when hiring in neighboring Ukraine. She will also wriggle out of the Russian-Ukrainian guilt. I will approach 2 or 3 rocks, and on the way to the end of Donald Trump's cadence. Then, there is also the understanding that Trump will not be into the topic of brother and fate. This is an absolutely real option, to explore Europe by a careless continent, richly flowed from Ukraine to Europe. They will come to this place of residence from the Portnikov mines of Ukraine. So it can be. You know, Ukraine is in NATO, it's not Ukraine in the reset. The spitballs were baited, it turned out, they are in the Oval Office. And I do not know the chances of Caesar to jump out at the prices in a. And this is in May more wine for any rank Zashitsia. You have bottles in May. Alarmingly, Aliska threw two hands. And understanding where you will go, and also you don't want to live in a warring state. Well, as it will come, if you can't tick right now. I have already landed with a flight. Literally. Spratt praises that notifying process. Agency tars on the knowledge of cola will you. Here's Trump again saying that everyone will be worried about the oyster chick by Xi Jinping and Putin. You don't know what else to worry about. Stats, denuclearization of defense spending in 2. That is something Trump thinking Viscopy budget received in the state, and to sit and Putin can a bucket of cotton sept. Here. So that's the important point. Supposedly, of course. Oh. So that's it. Tika is extremely intelligent, and who arrived in the Russian capital, just overgrown, absolutely did not understand. So we absolutely do not declare. The Maya nation all look. And that's where the guilt started. Through Biden, Trump says, through Biden. Biden, saying that Ukraine can stop and donate, being like Ukraine in place of Russia, allowed prices. Well, here I'll tell you a simple speech, what at a time thinking and soul seriously. Washing, that even by promising Putin, Ukraine will not enter into NATO yet, then Putin is in mind. Although I'm not as promising, you know perfectly well, there are no prospects in the stupas of Ukraine, NATO, on the truth is not Bulow. There was no consensus ally. And you know that there are all people on the was, both Putin and Trump. Biden. Russia once had a simple formula. She was stuck with 1,990. I also want Ukraine to join NATO, the European Union, Russia. Russia is pretending Ukraine to be a disabled person. So it was with Moldova, and so it was with Georgia in the 2014 kind. So it was from Ukraine. And so that no one had greedy sums in the Russian Federation came to an unprecedented crock in Kiev on Nikola Ranishin did not go. It is very frequent on the territory of Ukraine. Respecting that the food is already an exiled signal to enter. Ukraine can't be moved anywhere else, it is still floundering with Russia, and the call until the moment when it does not understand, and with Russia. And President Biden, at 2020, gave a speech 2020, at the NATO summit. He was tested. Russia's occupation of the territory is respected to join Ukraine before NATO. And VNI will not be taken in. It is important in Tiki that Ukraine has seen NATO standards. And Zakim Rahunkam was with just a formula, as Russia was richly attached with just a formula, even before NATO. Of course. It is also revealed that it is impossible to get Ukraine. Ukraine was Ukraine disabled, it is all one to join NATO. And it will be able to join NATO. Valuable problems. And the test has gone, and the bill is real for the guarantee, and so that Ukraine does not enter into donations. So that it is overestimated as a target for the occupation of Russia. What else is the problem in donut? In the fact that Russia, Ukraine is rich in conflict. And Trump is respected dramatically at a time. At a time, the councillors now with the receipt of the states will not enter for European Ukraine, and for the clay of Maya significance. Right? And that was red-faced. Another pro-Russian regime. I am still a disabled person from Ukraine, not a guarantee, but not for Ukraine, not for Georgia, not for Moldova. Then my guarantee is like a pro-Russian regime. And I am in all of these three: Ukrainians before the European Union, Georgia and Ukraine before NATO. The bullets here are no more serious than a strategic test for the formation of a pro-Russian regime. In Ukraine, the 24th fierce 2020 other rock about a chain of loved ones, Pochavsia for happiness conceded. It's time for us to go to work in Georgia, and then I'll throw the shutters, and I won't go anywhere there. The pro-Russian regime of occupation of Abkhazia recognizes their independence. The mind. Russian. The Russian Vlad Bula would be frequent, that is, all Georgian geopolitical interests. Well, in Moldova, that I am fighting for Moldova. A little Ukraine gave up. And the Russians actually caused a humanitarian catastrophe in Transnistria by provoking an energy rat in Moldova. This is essentially a hybrid war. Well, so I'm telling Biden, and I'm telling what Biden said, the formula has changed. Trump is overgrown, Namagit this formula is turned. And so, of course, we cannot be a member of NATO, of the Near Eastern Radan Republic. So we mean that Ukraine nowhere and disabled brother is not possible. We will understand. And the reasons for the drives. And definitely not Putin. And Trump in the subject, I think you're the worst to the fact that this is an absolutely inadequate look at the suite. The very statement that the fighting ideas in Ukraine began with the fact that Biden on both sides in Ukraine in a stupa donato. Absolutely Bazavili about EC absolutely on because you're explain. Well, the Central Committee is an absolutely terrible story. You are developing the stream. I think we're still on top of history, there's still a rich future, but I'll tell you what I think on you won't be on the night. Trump comes to the Oval Office, and starting with the journalists, they begin with, and we still have someone on board. Landed at Moscow's Vnukovo airport. The American series, having arrived in a dream with the Russians, and about what? The dialogues at the Munich conference will be important to us. In the same place, Maya Vishina, and the share of persuasions about rare metals, and the US Treasury Secretary submitted to the President. More oysters of the President, and with President Trump, and on Trump, says that maybe Trump you dilute with Putin. He does not need to dilute, and he does not need to embroider on these. And for the test of the temples to Ukraine to pass 4 billion ended on his balance sheet. Serious speech. So firm, but the details of the scope of Trump and Zelensky. Yesterday's Axis. Allegedly, Mr. Trump is notified, saying that, of course, his rest is not with Putin. However, the gentry adore him, diplomatically ended in success. We don't need to talk to Putin back in Ukraine. Trump, having said that Putin wants to conclude, and having tested at leisure. Said to be ready Putin, you said he wants to make the sticks, that pobo you there you exile. Trump, saying that Mabit Oyster with Vice President Wentz and Rubio's secretary in Munich will also be important for launching the diplomatic process. And Trump gave a special phone number that he had seen a lot of people on it, and after saying that, Trump would also give him a champion Lantic like Alexander Usyk. Here's a tesh for you. Such a long-lived story is overgrown about the prelude media of yesterday's contacts between Trump and Putin and Tika. Well, here I will continue the stitch for this letic, they will be overgrown. The notification came that the sanctions against Poroshenko's daughter-in-law with a wash in the IP room were allegedly imposed in the decree to straighten this Rumbo wash again and vote for a replacement in the document. For God's sake, Yaka Ganba, Yaka Ganba. Here we are talking three hands about national identity, about effective Vlad, and we cannot correctly answer the number on the computer. And R can be seen on the effectiveness of the power can be seen. I will rise even the most just world. I thank you for being in the dark ether. I think that we will still have very little time in the oyster and day. Subscribe to the channel. To say that you and I have reached the figure of 800,204 on the air with the same skin, who subscribed and overgrown in the minds of authoritarianism attacks on independent journalists. Your skin voice, skin is important, it's just that you don't give up for understanding. So dump the forces of Ukraine on Verda. Not Trump, but throw off the forces of Ukraine. I am the main guarantor of the fact that the Ukrainian power is a Buddha. Good.